he ends up with a guy named Iori, who's sort of a student of his, and they're living in the mountains. And again, I think this is as he's starting to mature and grow in this area where he is. It's a mountainous area in Japan, and for those of you that haven't been in Japan, it's got some incredibly beautiful mountains and
incredible.
Yeah, beautiful.
Even right outside of Tokyo, for people who are ever thinking of going, there's a place called Nikko, which is Nikko, and the O is long, but Nikko, and they have beautiful temples and mountains. That is where I did the Japanese horseback archery. Just as a side note on the Japanese horseback archery, it was so great. So there are not, as you would imagine, many schools for horseback archery, but one of the families, one of the clans that still exists, the Ogasawara. So the Ogasawara is the family, and then Ryu, like RYU, is the school, and that Ryu comes up a lot in Musashi's life. If you look at the history, it's like such and such Ryu, such and such Ryu, like the school of whatever. And Ogasawara Ryu, Japanese horseback archery, is what I ended up studying with one of the members of the Ogasawara family, and we did it in Nikko, which is a stunning place to train. And just as a little bit of context on what exactly this means. So the ceremonial version of Japanese horseback archery entails a straightaway that is marked off in my case with metal rods like rebar. Mm-hmm. So you effectively have these stakes in the ground that are about 3 feet high of rebar, like every 5 feet, 2 parallel lines running, let's call it 300 or 500 feet. And you get on a horse at the very beginning of this track, and there are 3 targets laid out equally distanced over that 500-foot space. The first one probably comes up at about 100 meters, and they're about the size of a big dinner plate. And you're on the horse. The saddle is wood, so you don't sit on it. You squat above it, and you have tabi on, which are these split socks. You don't have shoes on. In these stirrups that actually do not enclose the foot around the foot. They don't encircle the foot. You stick it in kind of like a slipper. And you have a really wide stance, and then you have a bow, which is about 6 feet long, in my case, in my left hand. And the bottom of the bow you keep inside your thigh, and then you have arrows that are stuck into your belt on your lower back. And your first arrow is knocked, and then you pull the line slightly and lock it down with your index finger so that there's tension on it. And then you have the reins, and you take off at a full gallop, and then you throw the reins down, and you gallop with no control of the horse. And these rebar that are set every 5 feet keep the horse galloping in a straight direction. And you fire the first arrow at the first target, and then you have to reload your arrow by reaching to your back, pulling the arrow out. And there's a really technical, somewhat complicated way of knocking the arrow very, very quickly while you're riding a horse. And then you intend to hit the next 2 targets while you're yelling. There's certain things you're supposed to yell as you shoot at your target. And it's an incredible demonstration. And they do this at the temples in Nikko, which to me is what comes to mind in terms of imagery when we're talking about his experience in these mountainous regions. And lesson number 1, you do not want to fall off. And people do fall off, because if you fall off your horse, you get trampled by the horse and you hit the rebar. But the reason I brought this up is that everyone has seen restaurants say that say established 1946, established 1987, established whatever. And the son, a pretty young guy in his mid-30s, really strong. The bow I shot had maybe like a 60-pound or 65-pound tension, which is surprisingly difficult for people who have not done much archery to hold that at full extension for a period of time, especially on a horse. It's like 65 is 70 pounds is quite legit on a long bow or a recurve bow. And he was pulling a bow that was 120 pounds, like nothing. And his jacket, he had what might look like sort of a shiny, like 1980s like breakdancing jacket is kind of what it looked like, with like the elastic tube portions on the wrists, and on the back it said Ogasawara Yabusame, established 1157. I was just like, yeah, this goes back away.
Did you hit the targets?
At the very end, I did. Yeah,
you got them. That because shooting from vehicles is really hard. Shooting guns from vehicles. I mean, it's just hard. I can't even imagine trying to do a bow and arrow on horseback on a wooden saddle.
Yeah, it's definitely a different thing. I was very surprised that I actually ended up hitting the targets, but yeah, at the very end.
How long did you train it for?
Another thing I would not recommend. I crammed it into a week. I had a week to train. And
did you know how to ride a horse before?
I had some experience on a horse, but Western style, for people who don't know, if you think rodeo, where you're effectively seated in the saddle. It's kind of like the Harley Davidson of horse riding. Like your feet are out in front of you, or your heels are dropped. You don't post. And Japanese is somewhere between. It's closer to English, where you'd be more elevated, and the position is very, very different. You're effectively in almost a sumo stance, like you're very much abducted, like your groin is very, very open. So I was extremely sore. I felt like I was doing like suspended squat practice for hours every day. So after a few days of that, pretty uncomfortable, and we lost 3 days, I want to say, to rain when we couldn't. It was too dangerous for the horses and the humans to train doing anything in those conditions. So we had about 4 days of real training.